Sankirtan Yogya Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki, Jai Jai Gaura Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna, welcome everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to our Sunday Bhagavat Sravana program. We're so happy to have you here. Is this anybody's first time at this program? Welcome! Welcome. What's your name?
Aaron.
Harry?
No, Aaron.
Aaron. So nice to meet you, Aaron. How did you hear about our program today?
Well, I was looking for Sasa in New York.
Wonderful.
And I Googled you guys, and I've come a few times, but it's my first time, so yes.
Wonderful. Well, we're so glad to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we have our special guest joining us as well, also your first time at the program. So before I introduce our speaker today, I'll just give a quick run through of what the day will look like. So we just had some wonderful kirtan. Thank you so much for leading us, Jai Das. We will then have a class given by His Grace Partha Das. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, wonderful. And Uttama Dasi. Wonderful. Thank you. And then we will have a little more kirtan and an arti. And then we'll have prasadam in the back, some vegan sanctified food. So without further ado, I would love to welcome our speakers to come on up. Thank you so much for being here. So His Grace Partha Das and his wife Uttama Dasi, they are joining us from Sharanagati Dham in Canada. They took initiation from Srila Prabhupada together in 1973. Several days after taking second initiation, Partha Das became head pujari for Sri Sri Radha Madan Mohan in Vancouver, Canada, and he has remained close to them for 20 years. Together, they are part of the Grihastha Division team since 2004. They provide counseling for couples all over the world and perform marriages together. They have many very impressive certifications, both for counseling in the secular world and marriage counseling in the secular world, as well as in the devotional world. We are so honored to have them joining us this weekend for workshops, lectures, and this morning's class. So please give a warm 3 Haribols for our guest today. Haribo! Haribo! Haribo!
Do you start with Jai Radhamadava, or you do just get right into it, or you... That's up to us, Aaron. You were going to say that? Oh, I've been told never to touch anything. See? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava I was just thinking that that song is a description of some of the relationships in the spiritual world. And we're all here because we would like to experience spiritual relationships. And so part of what my husband and I do is to help people elevate their relationships to a more transcendental level, so that when we're all on the transcendental level, we can make that connection.
So we're just going to chant a little invocation before we start. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttama Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Savitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Balaram Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Saram Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Namaste Tapta Kamshana Gaurandi Radhe Vrindavashri Vrishabhanusite Devi Manamani Priye Vanchakalpasurvasya Kripasimse Jaja Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So what we do before we talk about spiritual topics is we try to invoke the blessings from our previous teachers, and so that's why we often chant some mantras before, because we understand that if we want to improve our relationships, we hang out with those who are good with such things, and by their teachings and their association, we can perhaps also come to that transcendental platform. So, in this connection, I'd like to read one verse and purport from Bhagavat Gita as it is by Srila Prabhupada, and I'll just read a couple other verses also. This is Bhagavad Gita 1861. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridashaya vimutishtati brahmayam sarva bhutani yantra gavandhimayaya. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of material energy. Purport. Arjuna was not the supreme knower, and his decision to fight or not to fight was confined to his limited discretion. Lord Krishna instructed that the individual is not all in all. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, or he himself Krishna as the localized supersoul, sits in the heart directing the living being. After changing bodies, the living entity forgets his past deeds, but the supersoul, as the knower of past, present, and future, remains the witness of all his activities. Therefore, all the activities of the living entities are directed by this supersoul. The living entity gets what he deserves and is carried by the material body, which is created in the material energy under the direction of the supersoul. As soon as a living entity is placed in a particular type of body, he has to work under the spell of that bodily situation. A person situated in a high-speed motor car goes faster than one seated in a slower car. Though the living entities, the drivers, may be the same. Similarly, by the order of the Supreme Soul, material nature fashions a particular type of body to a particular type of living entity so that he may work according to his past desires. The living entity is not independent. One should not think himself independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The individual is always under the Lord's control. Therefore, one's duty is to surrender, and this is the injunction of the next verse. So the next verse is Tam eva saranam gacha sarvebhavana bharata tat vashara param shantim stanam praptashi shashvatam. O sign of Bharata, surrender unto him utterly. By his grace you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. In the current world we are living in, the word surrender doesn't really have a very good connotation. We have these conceptions of surrendering to the government, surrendering to all kinds of control, and it may sound very stifling. So what does surrender have to do with developing love? Because really, the aspiration of Vaishnavas, spiritual practitioners, is to develop love for God and love for all fellow human beings. So that surrender may sound a little frightening, it may sound very irrelevant or contradictory. But there's a very interesting verse which follows. Iti gyanam akitam guya guyantaram maya vim rashaitad ashaishena yatechasi yatakaru. Thus I have explained to you still more confidential knowledge. Then Krishna says, deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. So Krishna, he's saying surrender, but he's saying, I've explained the situation to you, now you can do what you wish to do. So surrender by force, that's coercion, manipulation, imprisonment, stifling. But surrender on the basis of free will, that's love. That is love. I remember was in a discussion, and one new devotee we were discussing this verse and about what Krishna says, deliberate on this fully and do as you wish to do. And he was asked, well, what does that mean to you? And he said, it means that Krishna's not commanding you to surrender, he's giving you the option. And he was asked, how does that make you feel? And he thought for actually just about a minute, and then he said, it makes it easier to surrender. Because you know it's a voluntary thing out of love. So that's the picture of what spiritual love is like. It's a voluntary giving, a voluntary surrender. So what has that got to do with
first verse I read where Krishna is talking about how the material body is like a yantra, a machine. And that's very relevant to me because I gave up the possibility of pursuing a career in mechanical engineering and became a devotee of Krishna. So it's very interesting. We have a body that's like a machine. And as Prabhupada points out in the first verse in purport I read, Krishna is dwelling within the heart, and as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he is situated within the heart, and from him come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. That actually, especially spiritual knowledge comes within the heart. It doesn't really come from rational thought, it doesn't really come from the gray matter or our brain. Even Albert Einstein, he said all his biggest breakthroughs in scientific thought, he said it didn't actually come by kind of a rational thought process. He said it just kind of somehow came to him, somehow was revealed. And he also said, I don't believe God plays dice with the universe. So he was quite a spiritually minded man. So going back to the point of the yantra, or this material body, as spirit souls, we are within these material bodies and we are different from this body. And so somehow this body is a vehicle, we have to take care of it and manage it. It has many positive things and also many things which are, like any machine, has certain things which at certain times and circumstances become problematic. If anyone's on any kind of machine breaks down, malfunctions, short circuits, who knows, things always go wrong. So there's things we have to do to manage those machines. And in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, very important chapter also, Lord Krishna is talking about the mind and describing how our mind is like, it can be our friend and it can be our enemy. And he describes how we have to control the higher self. We have to control the lower self by the higher self. So our higher self is comprised of logic, reason, compassion, emotions, emotional regulation. That is our higher self. That's where our compassionate self comes from. And our lower self tends to be lust, greed, anger, judgment, criticism, controlling. And it's very interesting. There's a physiological explanation of how this higher and lower self functions in our body. And it's very much related to the spiritual understanding. And do you want to explain the break?
So, Krishna's saying in the Bhagavad Gita that we need to keep charge of things by using our higher self. So, I think many of us don't quite realize how our body functions so that we're able to better stay in the consciousness that we wish to be in. So, in our physical brain, the machine of the brain, it has two parts, a lower part and a higher part. And that's why Krishna's saying you want to control this lower part. So the lower part is valuable. It's not that it's not valuable. It functions to keep you safe. And it governs your fight, flight, freeze responses that you may need in different circumstances. However, it's a very sensitive machinery, and it triggers unsafe circumstances, even slight unsafe circumstances. It gets triggered to alarm. So I kind of look at it like the smoke alarm, outside your kitchen. It's there so you know when your house is on fire. Your smoke alarm has probably gone off, like 20 times in the last year, and your house has not caught fire. It's just, you had too much flour in your chapatis, or the incense was too close to the smoke alarm, and so it goes off, because it's a very sensitive instrument. So our lower part of our brain, our lower self is like that. It remembers every single thing that's happened to us in this life. And I kind of suspect maybe even past lives, because we have this body and this makeup because of our conditioning from our previous lives. So it really, really wants to keep us safe. So if somebody says something to us which makes us feel very uncomfortable or unsafe, it may sound the alarm. And that alarm is also equipped with a secretion of chemicals called cortisol and adrenaline, which spew out to make our bodies move quickly to get out from, say, the fire. So when that cortisol and adrenaline is being what's the word? Secreted, then it floods not only the lower part of the brain, but actually the higher part of the brain. And the higher part of the brain, it develops a little bit later in life. We're all born with the lower part functioning very well. So that's why, like, if a baby's hungry, it knows to cry. You know, it sends out messages, I need something. And as we get older, starting in our early we start to understand what we should do and what we should not do, what's a better activity. And so we gradually learn, develop higher intelligence, better discrimination, we develop our moral values, we see that we need to have compassion for other living entities, and it's not all just about me, like it is in the beginning. So that our higher self that governs those behaviors, when the cortisol and adrenaline is secreted, it actually disconnects our higher thinking and rationale powers from functioning. So there's one neuroscientist called Dan Siegel, and he uses the hand model of the brain. So it's like if your thumb is part of your lower part, and your amygdala is the one that sends out those things. So when it's sending them out, it makes your higher reasoning part offline. So this is kind of when you're offline, when you flip your lid, when you get upset about something and you don't really choose wisely what we say, what we do. Sometimes they flip their lid, right? Because they're not really using that, we're not using that higher intelligence to determine the best course of behavior. And so, because we're often triggered by other people's behaviors, it really plays into all of our relationships on how we relate with other people. Because if we're in relationships where we feel threatened or not safe, our body can maybe start to secrete that cortisol and adrenaline, and then we're not acting from our higher selves. Yeah.
The brain and the body is extremely complex, very complex instrument. Just like a car, it's very complex. You just have to know a few basic things to operate it. Steering wheel, ignition, gear shift, brakes, a few lights on the dash you've got to pay attention to. You don't need to know all the intricacies of every valve and sensor in the whole vehicle. Similar with our body, we have a higher and lower self, and also the higher self is for logic, reason, and compassion, but the real information, especially the spiritual information which is fed to our higher self, comes from our heart. And both the Vedic Shastras and even modern science acknowledges the fact that there are something like between 400,000 and 900,000 neurons going from the heart to the brain, feeding information to the brain. And we also have neurons that go from our gut to the brain. Something they talk about gut feelings, where you feel something in your heart. That's actually a reality. It's actually getting information from our heart, which is what we're striving for in Bhakti Yoga, to learn to live from our heart. And as Uttama is explaining how that process of escalation takes place, it blocks this higher part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, but you also lose touch with that heart knowledge.
So when you lose touch with, your heart and your real self, we tend to become black and white, rigid. We even feel a little constricted in the body. We don't take in other people's opinions very well. Our speaking tends to be harsh. So when we get into those states of mind or that type of behavior, it's a little signal to us that we're actually not responding from our higher selves. And how are we going to access that transcendental realm when we're not even in our higher material realm? Not very likely. So a big part of relationships is consciousness, being conscious of how we're behaving, how we're thinking, and bring our awareness to a higher platform so that we can receive spiritual knowledge, so that we can interact in ways with others that are uplifting. We get the upliftment from them and they get it from us. Unfortunately, when we're only functioning from our lower self, we're not very interested in relationships. We're not interested in giving and we're not interested in receiving. So how are we going to really understand anything about the transcendental realm when we're that shut off? It's all about me. That's why when Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that one has to use one's higher self to govern the lower self, he says, and thus overcome the urges of lust. And this lust is not just the senses. It's that desire to be the controller, to overlord. So we see most of the material activities are just based on how am I going to get the upper hand, how am I going to get something more for myself. It's all centered around me. And when things are just centered around us, it doesn't open us up to relationships. And what to speak of transcendental relationships, if you want to have a relationship with God or with other transcendental beings. So Krishna's urging us to try to stay to stay in our higher selves as much of the time, as much as we can. It's just beneficial for everything.
The deities I worshipped in Vancouver for 20 years, they were named Radha, Madan, and Mohan. So Madan Mohan is a deity of Krishna which guides us towards this connection. It's called Sambandha, or the connection. So it's a connection with him, but that connection with him, God, Krishna, it's not separate from connection with all other beings. And all other beings are very important. And there's one very, very cruel irony in this world, and that is sometimes it's difficult to be loving all the time and connected with the people we are closest to and we actually love the most. It's just this paradox, it's this cruel paradox. And why is that? Why is that? And one of the reasons is, Krishna wants us to behave very nicely with all living entities, and if we're not, actually in accessing the potency and purity of the holy name, there's 10 very important things that are advised to enable us to access that ability to chant the holy name of the Lord purely. And one is not to criticize or blaspheme any devotee of the Lord, or even any living entity. So if we have negative interactions with anyone, what to speak of those we love, that's not very pleasing to Krishna. It's like a father sees his children fighting. It is very painful to see that. Another reason it's very hard is we as spirit souls, we have self-worth. We're all very valuable as spirit souls, very unique, independent by Krishna. So we all have that self-worth. However, sometimes we also get that sense of self-worth reaffirmed by how we perceive those we love view us. So, if, we as Hare Krishnas, we sometimes go out in the street and chant wearing these dhotis and playing hand cymbals, and people might say, oh, there's one of those crazy Hare Krishna people, blah, blah, blah. And that just rolls like water up the back of a duck. We have no relationship with that person. It's just like it goes in one ear and out the other. If someone we care about very dearly says, oh, Partha, you're just a stupid fool, you did this and that, blah, 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 that it's really painful, extremely painful. And it tends to be very much amplified. And what happens if we have healthy emotional regulation and a healthy sense of self-esteem? I'll see, Bhagavat is comparing me to Wallace and Gromit or whatever. Okay, she's just having a bad day and I actually did do something wrong here. But if I have my self-esteem has been compromised for some reason, maybe as a child I've been criticized a lot, or had some school teacher who was really always on my case, or parents are always forcing me, demanding I get high grades and put all that pressure on me. I might become very sensitive. I might have what you would call an emotional scar. And having emotional scars is like, I don't know if anyone's ever sprained a rib or broken a rib. It's painful, right? And it kind of starts to heal, and one of your friends comes up and wants to give you a big hug, you're just going to push them away because it is going to be so painful. Well, they want to give you a loving exchange, but it's painful. So similarly, in our relationship, sometimes we have some emotional scars, and it can make those interactions painful because it rubs the scar. And the way it rubs the scar is, Uttama was describing how we have this lower part of our brain, which we'll make it real simple, just refer to it as the amygdala. It is recording all the things you experience in your life, and likely all of us at some point as a child touched something hot, a candle, a stove burner, and we got burnt. And that left a big impression in our memory, in this amygdala. And we learned that next time I see a flame or a hot stove, I know, even as a child, I'm going to avoid that. Maybe I went to some party at a house once, could have been years and years ago, and it happened to be a blue house, and it caught on fire and something exploded, and I barely get out with my life. It might be an extremely traumatic experience. And similarly, that lower part of my brain, the amygdala, it's stored there. It's stored there. So that part of that brain, it served me well when I was a child and I was hungry, I could cry or whatever. I learned not to touch a hot stove. That was very helpful then. However, in my adult life, maybe many years after that house fire, I'm going to visit some friend I've never seen before. He's moved somewhere, and I get out of the car and I see it's a blue house. I actually might not even have any conscious memory of that previous experience, but this lower part of my brain, the amygdala, remembers that's recorded, and it starts secreting this adrenaline and cortisol. My hands might start sweating, chest might become tight, as she was saying, and I become fearful. So I'm projecting the past experience into the reality, which the situation might not be at all equal. So sometimes in our lives, we have different kinds of, sometimes we might refer to capital T trauma, like serious abuse and emotional, physical, sexual, but that's very serious trauma. That can have that kind of effect. Similarly, there can be what's called small T trauma, like in my family, we never really talked about emotions, so I never really learned to process emotions until I became a devotee, and actually with the help of it. But so I had a hard time developing emotions. So sometimes those small T traumas also, they can play interactions. My close friend, my work associate, my partner, spouse, they say something, they're not meaning it in a really negative or hurtful way, but it triggers something from that past memory that boom gets projected into the present, and I tend to overreact. And that can very much happen in relationships. despite the fact that we might know the spiritual philosophy, understand that we should be more tolerant of the tree and devoid of all false prestige and really to offer all respects to others. But in those moments where we get triggered, you actually, as she was saying, you flip your lid. Once that adrenaline and cortisol start going, your prefrontal cortex goes offline, and you lose that knowledge from your heart. It can't be processed. You're literally offline. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's talking about controlling the higher self and the lower self. And there's one very interesting pastime in the Srimad Bhagavatam of a great offense was committed to Dhruva Maharaj. Someone actually killed his brother. And he was taking revenge on a whole dynasty, just killing all of them. It was, and there was a great saintly personality from Swayambhuva Manu realized that Dhruva had completely gone overboard, and he just didn't come and say, Dhruva, stop. First, he came to him and he started saying something glorifying Krishna. First, he started to glorify Krishna. It's recorded in Srimad Bhagavatam. Describing how Krishna's Supreme Personality of God and different things about the Lord. And then he glorifies Dhruva. You came from this very exalted dynasty of Kshatriyas who were meant to protect society. And then he said, Dhruva, control your anger. It's the foremost enemy on the path of self-realization. And then Dhruva was able to calm himself. So it's like that when we get escalated. This is referred to as physiological arousal, and I don't know, I've experienced it on occasion. For me, it feels like a pressure cooker, not like a North American pressure cooker that kind of just, fizzes. I don't know how many people have seen an Indian pressure cooker. They're totally quiet, and all of a sudden it sounds like it's going to explode. That's what it was like for me. I felt like I was going to explode. So I'm sure we all, at some time, experience that kind of escalation in some shape, some form, manifest in some way within us. And when that happens, actually, you can't stop. Your mind's offline, and generally, if you're going to say something to someone and respond, what's going to come out of your mouth is going to be garbage. So how can you stop? So how do you stop?
Arjuna asked Krishna that same thing. He says, why is it sometimes I'm just overpowered to do things I know I shouldn't do? And his answer is, it's lust only. So it's that same thing. It's just like that desire that is that conditioning in me that I have to have it for myself or I won't be okay. And that's conditioning. We're conditioned how to just look after ourselves, but we're not actually looking after ourselves. Most of the behaviors that we want don't even help us. So it's just the, senses which are trying to convince us that we should do something, and so it tries to convince the mind, and then sometimes our intelligence comes in and finds a good way to get what the senses want. However, we're supposed to use our intelligence to go for higher things. And in order to do that consistently, we have to practice. So we might think that we're going to come and start a spiritual process and everything's going to go smoothly. And we'll be able to concentrate and, make our steps, upward in our spiritual advancement. And we can when we don't let those conditionings come in and affect us. However, they sound these alarms all the time. They really convince us that we need to look after these old things.
So how do you turn off the smoke alarm?
I call him because I can't reach it.
Well, it's going off, but it was only some instance that isn't fire, so how do you turn it off?
So when we actually realize what's happening, it's easier to act. We go, oh, it's not really the fire in the house, it's just the smoke alarm. Take a breath, look around, find a step stool, turn it on. So a big part of not overreacting or reacting to our conditioning is that pause. Just to pause and try to understand what is happening. And it's even how the body functions. When we can take a deep breath and a longer out breath than an in breath, and it's down far enough that it goes into our belly, because when we get conditioned, we only breathe, the top part when we get scared. Just taking that breath, Krishna's designed it so when we take those deeper breaths, it slows down the response of the amygdala and gives time for our intelligence to kick in and think of something. So it's being aware. And we are not our bodies, but our body stores our conditionings. So we can look towards our body and see, are my hands getting clammy? Is my shoulders getting tight? Is my stomach getting a little ache in it? It's kind of, oh, the smoke alarm's just about to go off. Cover that body right now and it won't go off. You can act quicker. So it's a matter of awareness of understanding how our conditionings affect us, how the body plays into it, how Krishna's arranged for the different levels of our consciousness to work. So they're all supposed to work in harmony, and when we know how they work, we can get the optimal results.
One thing too, there's different degrees of escalation. As she's saying, sometimes if you're just noticing it, you can catch it. Even sometimes you may have someone close to you and you see them start to escalate. Actually, if you can acknowledge what they're feeling. Oh, I've seen that you're upset with me because I forgot to do this. You must be really upset with me. I'm guessing you're really upset with me.
Yeah.
But what just happened there? What just happened there? I acknowledged what I did wrong, and I acknowledged the emotion that it caused her. And physiologically, when you can name an emotion, it tames it. And actually, when you name an emotion, it also produces a hormone that helps to soothe that lower part of your brain, which would otherwise get triggered. So you can actually help someone else emotionally regulate. Sometimes, however, the pressure cooker, when I first saw an Indian pressure cooker, I thought it was going to actually blow up. That's what I felt like. When you get like that, it's very important to understand that I want to respond from a point of love. I'm unable to do that right now. And to be able to realize that you need to take a time out and step back from that. Because you're literally flooded with these hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, and physiologically it will take 20 minutes at least for that to get filtered out of your bloodstream. And when it gets filtered out, your higher self, your prefrontal cortex can come back online and start to pick up the messages from your kind, compassionate heart. And you can have a rational, non-confrontational, constructive dialogue or whatever about whatever the issue was. And so that's a very important skill we teach couples, is to understand how the process of escalation occurs, what's going on in the background, what you can do to self-regulate, when you start to notice that, and when you really go offline, what you can do. And we've had couples tell us that was a complete game changer in their relationship, because they realize we can come back and talk about it like friends, instead of just completely offline. So it's a very practical way you can practice Bhakti Yoga, which Bhakti Yoga means to always come from a platform of love and kindness and compassion. And sometimes we're all going to have bad days or bad moments, and
We just need to take a little break
yeah,
and get back into our higher self.
yeah.
Not respond from our lower selves.
And
I remember the first movie my dad took me to was Bambi. It was so traumatizing. I hate movies. It was great. When I think about it from a Dory's point of view, I actually don't like movies. But in the Bambi movie, it was like someone said, my mother told me, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So she had it right, When we want to spew out those negative things, it means we need a break. Because it's rarely what the other person did. It's our consciousness is in the wrong place and we're perceiving it wrong. And so it really helps to not take things personally and to realize that, you know, I am the driver of this car and I can respond how I choose to when I'm in full control. So a big part of relationships also is to keep ourselves in that relational integrity so that when somebody else is having a hard time, we can stay in ours. Because the tendency is when you come near somebody else that's kind of vibrating negative vibrations and you come close, it's like those tuning forks, right? And you don't even have to touch and it starts to vibrate. So we also need to take the responsibility to not only exhibit positive relational behaviors, we also need to not be triggered by other people's negative actions and speeches. Because they're separate from us. They're just having their bad day. Anybody can make up anything about anybody all the time. It doesn't mean it's true, right? And so when we stay in our own transcendental place, we can see that, okay, they're just having a bad day, and if I can stay calm, it may send some, calm vibrations, and maybe they can calm down. So in relationships, when we're with somebody who's not able to emotionally regulate and is flipped a little bit, the more calm we can stay, we can try to lend our prefrontal, transcendental, higher self. We can try 2 or 3 times, and if they're just too escalated, then okay, we'll let you deal with it, and then we can talk later. So we have responsibility both ways, to behave well in relationships to others, and to manage our own emotions and behaviors ourselves. And that's how we can have more transcendental sanghas, that we're there to connect on that higher platform, because that's the only place we can connect from. So if we want to have meaningful relationships, we need to come in our higher self and be able to give and receive those transcendental messages and relationships and learning.
The level of development of our spiritual consciousness is very much reflected in how we relate to and deal with, especially those we love the most. As I was saying, sometimes that's difficult. So it's a very important thing, and this understanding is something very important for what we call anartha nivriti, which is a part of the spiritual process, which involves removing things that might be well, the process is compared to growing something called a devotional creeper, which is growing towards the spiritual world to develop full love of God and all the dignities. Sometimes when that creeper grows, there's weeds that grow alongside. And if anyone's garden, there's a mystic thing where whatever you're growing, some kind of weed starts growing that looks exactly like what you're trying to grow. And you have to learn to pull them out. So being able to understand what's happening with their consciousness and mind, with this physiological escalation, how to regulate it, that can help remove a lot of these weeds, which actually sabotage our efforts to develop love of God and love for everyone. So it's a very valuable skill to have in our spiritual life, to be able to love everyone for the pleasure of Krishna.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Your experiences, your realizations, ask a question?
Can you elaborate a little bit on, can you explain a little more what that means to differentiate the weed in the heart? How taking that out, give us some examples of what that would look like in
here's an example. I might have had a bad day. Maybe I'm triggered by something.
You not speaking up too?
Okay, shut up, speak. That's because you didn't set the microphone up. You didn't set. I could start like that, like really super negative and just dump on you. And But if I can focus on my higher self, Prabhu, I'm kind of tall, can the microphone be like, 2 inches higher or whatever? I can say it with respect and compassion, or I can say it from this really low, dark place where I'm controlling and criticizing. And so that's like I'm removing weeds when I can realize that I need to say what I need to say with respect, not with judgment and vengeance and criticism. Criticism is very detrimental emeritus. It's kind of sometimes it's like a go-to. It's very easy to criticize, especially with those we love. You always, you never. And I find like those words, like I talk to couples sometimes and they're saying, well, he never, she always, blah, blah, blah. And I just say what I'm hearing is that the word always and never is masking some inner pain. That there's something in their interactions that's hurting them, and then rather than saying what they need in just a compassionate way that, if you could do this for me, I would feel loved, protected, secure, whatever. But you never do this and blah, blah, blah. How do you respond to that? So it's like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying how we have to develop the mode of goodness by practice. So if I criticize you didn't do this, blah, 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 you always do that, blah, blah, blah. That's passion and ignorance. Now, if I make a humble request, well, can this get moved? Could you just move this 6 inches that way? It would make life easier for me. What's it like to hear it too? Like one's don't want to respond at all, and one you say, yeah, I'll be my friend and you can do that for me. So by realizing that we can catch the point where we might make those kind of criticisms or statements about someone in a way that are hurtful or harmful, and check that. That's like pulling out the weed, pulling out the...
Because the weed is we want it all our way.
Yeah.
We want it just like I like it.
Yeah.
You're not doing everything exactly like I like it, and it's irritating me.
And so the way that's going to make our bhakti lepta creeper flourish, if I can say it in a way that's nurturing, that I'll get what I want, and I'm nurturing you too in devotional service. So I'm saying it with love and compassion. It has to come from here, and I can't let it get blocked by the rest of the broken mechanics of my brain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, this is not mic. Okay, thank you so much. This is such a wonderful and enlivening class. I have 2 questions. I'll ask one first. We'll see if anyone else has questions. But how do you recommend that we, or I guess why is it that the people that are closest to us are the ones that we tend to want to criticize the most, or become the most triggered by? Your family, your parents, your partner or spouse. Why does that happen?
I suspect it's because they hit those deeper, more tender parts. And so we have higher expectations. We somehow think that they're gonna fulfill all of our needs and be there for us, where you don't have that expectation of somebody farther away, right? And it does bring out those maybe a lot more long-standing hurts that we have, because it goes a little bit deeper, so I think we get hurt a bit more.
That's so helpful, thank you. It's very hard, but I do try to remember those moments, if this person is so close to me, this is my parent, this is my sibling, this is someone that Krishna has planted in my life very specifically and in some way entrusted to me to care for. But those are the people that trigger it the most, so this is very helpful.
We understand from our Vaishnava philosophy, according to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to be able to develop that intimate connection with Krishna's holy name, we need to develop humility, tolerance, and patience. And so my question is, was that just going to fall from the sky one day in like this soothing rain? Is a magic switch going to get turned on? Magic wand, boop, you're going to be all peaceful. My experience, 53 years of marriage, family life, Krishna arranges situations for us to practice humility, tolerance, and patience.
You're welcome.
And also, learning those skills about emotional regulation can greatly speed up the process. Greatly speed up the process. So it's natural. Friction is. Could you walk across this room if there was no friction? No. So friction is good. So in the same way, in the spiritual world, also we see there's even seems to be friction between Radha and Krishna in their loving affairs. That there's a union, there's some argument with Radharani, and there's some separation. They come back and the relationship's sweeter. And we actually celebrate a 1 month festival about the friction between Mother Yashoda and Krishna, right? So in the spiritual world, we were talking about this yesterday. There's fighting, and fighting can be okay. Prabhupada actually said this once. Fight is okay if the goal is how to serve Krishna. He said, but there shouldn't be discord. Now, when I first read that, I thought, well, isn't discord the same thing as sacred fighting? And if you look at the definitions of discord, on one platform, the definition of discord is a strong difference of opinion. It's a discord. But on the level of a musical understanding, discord is if two notes are out of tune, it doesn't sound good. So our Shastra explains, and Prabhupada explained, how in the spiritual world, all talking is like singing. So even you read Srimad Bhagavatam, the conflict between Mother Yashoda and Krishna, and Radha and Krishna, and the gopis and the Kaura, it's all very sweet. It's like music. But in the spiritual world, they are completely on the heart platform, 108%. In the material world, it's very mixed. We're trying to overcome our conditioning, and it tends to come from our lower platform, our lower consciousness, and therefore we tend to have discord. So even conflict is not bad if we can manage it in non-confrontational, respectful ways. We can have very constructive. When you do that, I would say conflict becomes a challenge. But it very much is essential on remaining in your higher self connected with your heart. And that's the challenge because of our conditioning. And Bhakti Yoga means to practice that. And that we're going to screw up sometimes. We all screw up. But even if we do, we can go to our friend or partner and say, when that happened, that wasn't the real me, I apologize, and I'd like to try to figure out how we can do that better next time. And then we improve.
You had a second question?
Does anybody else have a question? Paris too? No, you have a question?
No, you go. Go. Ask your question now. Stop.
I know you do. I could feel it behind me.
Oh my God.
Okay, then we're gonna get back to Jenna's question. Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful class. My question is around people that were, as we're cultivating new relationships with people, how do we know oh, this is bitter in the beginning and sweet at the end, and maybe I need to go through this, or no, this is not good for me to pursue?
So you're getting to know someone and trying to understand the compatibilities.
Yeah.
We actually have developed resources especially for Vaishnavas looking to get into relationships. And one simple thing we did, one of our members came up with a list of 110, 120 questions that they could just sit down and talk about things related to different values and activities and what they think about different things. And just every time they meet, just talk about those kind of things. And they can kind of get to know themselves on deeper levels. And couples have told us, well, there's things there, we never thought about talking about those kind of things. One of the most accessed resources on our website, we get a lot of feedback from couples. They found it extremely helpful in getting to know each other, help them to,
Is what?
the list of questions.
Called?
The Grihasta team.
Yeah,
Grihasta
it's,
Discipline, sorry. I'm
yeah,
so
it's
sorry.
Vaishnava Family Resources, and it's called Premarital Questions. That is the question.
And we've actually met a few individuals. They said that when they went through that list of questions with their prospective partner, they realized they had some very different values that would make it very difficult to, maintain a healthy state of compatibility without too much work in the relationship. and they decided not to pursue the relationship. That's a success because they realized that before they entered into a serious commitment and discovered the differences a couple of years down the road. So that can be very helpful.
When you're looking to, develop a relationship with someone, there's many areas you want to look at, but the ones that you want to hone into are your lifestyles, your personality match, and your values. So when you start to get that feeling, it's probably the values are a little bit different. And you want to ask more questions to see what does that value, how does that play out in your life? Because it just may not be your value. And we all have, values that are kind of integral to us, and that's how we govern our life. And it's really hard to live with many great values incompatibilities, because it's kind of your core. And your core values, you shouldn't have to be somebody who you're not to be in a relationship. So if you're getting that kind of funny feeling, I would just slow down, ask more questions, and see how those play out. Because it's true, you may be initially triggered because of something in you from the past, and you think everybody's like that. So you give it a little time, you find out, oh, it's not really what I thought. You give it a little time, and ooh, it's worse than I thought. So, time, it's your friend. Not this instant soup right this minute.
A little footnote, I think Bhagavat Prabhu has put, I believe, on your website or your social media, some links to our different resources, website, YouTube channel, and there's all kinds of resources there for relationships, healthy relationships. And we see that as something that we have taken.
And?
As a service to Srila Prabhupada.
Did you have another question?
Because he's given us so much.
My final question was on the weed in the heart that you were talking about with the Dasi Prabhu, that I want it done the way I want it. This is not the way I would do it, and that's irritating me. Advice for how to pluck that weed.
That I'm right and you're wrong?
Yes, you're doing something that I don't like, or I would do it differently. This is not quite how I would do it. You're irritating me.
That's when your Achinta Beta Tattva philosophy comes in. Every living entity is similar to us and different from us. Somehow or other, because we're here because we want to play God, we want everybody to be just like us. And she's asking me why.
I can get triggered.
I'm going to prove your point. How you get rid of that controlling propensity, I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet.
You can ask yourself the question, do I need to be right or do I need to be in a relationship? Can you reflect that back?
Do I need to be right, or do I need to be in a relationship?
Ask yourself that question. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Unless it's a real core value that's being violated.
Is it such a big deal?
Yeah.
No, probably not.
It's so interesting, how we think everything has to be done our way. It's just a matter of taking a breath and realizing there's many different ways to do things. And I can do it my way, and they can probably do it their way, and everything's going to be okay. I don't know why it always has to be my way.
On the spiritual world, everything, it's relational. And like in those kind of interactions, it stops being relational, it starts to be self-centered. But if we can focus on the relational, as we become more and more relational, we can see ways that, okay, here's this difference, but there's ways we can work with that, in which we're both satisfied in a relational way, and the relation state is healthy. And when we start to become controlling or criticizing, it starts to pollute the atmosphere. And in terms of ecology, you're starting to pollute
The air that you also breathe.
And yet we're also breathing in that same air that we're spewing out. Right? So this is like emotional ecology, spiritual ecology, to learn to live from our hearts.
And with our heart, we are going to have our tea.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. His Grace Partha Dasa and His Grace Madame Devi. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for that incredible class and for our wonderful questions. So we are now going to have Arti for Sri Sravana Muralidhar for Chandra. So if you could please help to put the cushions away, we'll fold the chairs, and we will have Arti and Kirtan, and then I'll be back for more announcements. Thank you so much. I know, you can't leave New York forever, you never want to come back.
ki jai. Namacharya Hari Dasa Thakur ki jai. Nam se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Puri Nityananda Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Gita Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Maya Purnavadip Dham ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Yamuna Mai ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Radharani Dar ki jai. Chandra Bhagavan ki jai. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Yajna ki jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories. Glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Namaste, Namaste, Namaste. Thank you all so much for joining us for our Sunday program. So before we take Prashadam in the back, we have a few announcements. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Okay, Friday, May 2nd, we have a special Narasimha Yagya happening, put on by Bhakti Life to kind of kick us off for Lord Nrsimhadeva's Appearance Day, which is coming up. So that will be Friday, May 2nd, from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Very special evening. And then we have Nrsimha Chaturdashi on Sunday, May 11th. And this is pretty much all day. So it's going to kick off in the morning with our Bhagavat class, just like the same program that we had this morning. A special class given by Chaitanya Charan Das, who will be visiting us. That's very exciting. So we will have that, and then we'll roll right into the afternoon with Harinam, Kirtan, Abhishek, a drama. We'll have a class by our own Gauracharan Das, very exciting. And then we'll also have Prashadam. So the festivities will start at 11. They will run all the way until 8. And we encourage you to come for as much of the day as you can. And all of those specifics will be on the Bhakti Center website, in the temple newsletter, and then also in the WhatsApp. If you are not on those modes of communication yet and you'd like to be added, please see Bhakti, we're always just volunteering you, or Janitai, either one, anyone. And we'll get you added. Any other announcements that you have? Or that you want me to read? Okay, yes, thank you. We also had a special 4-day immersion with Dr. Irmala Edith Best. This will be on career Dharma coaching. She's written a fabulous book called Career Dharma to help you understand what Dharma looks like in a professional world, how to find the right fit for you. So there is a coaching training that's happening Thursday, April 24th through that Sunday, the 26th. Very exciting. You can sign up also on our website. Anything else, Bruno? That is not known to me at this time? Okay, wonderful. So the final announcement, as always, this is a community-driven program, so we rely on your donations. If you feel so inspired, there will be a bowl out front when you take Prashadam, as well as a QR code if it's easier for you to donate online. We are so appreciative of anything that you choose to give, and most of all, your time. Thank you so much for being here. Time, we know, is our most valuable resource. So please enjoy vegan Prashadam in the back, sanctified food, and that is all. No, that is not all. Giant Time has something to say.
Just a real quick thank you to Uttama, Devi, and Partha who have come from so far to give so much. We're very, very grateful to both of them for giving us uplifting association and inspiration, and also for their 53 years of being married, which is and the same in the lifetime of service to Srila Prabhupada and the Bodhi community. So it's really wonderful. We're very grateful and honored to have you both here. And you're going to be around anyway for the next few days as well. Also, there'll be at Matchless Gifts. Those who didn't get a chance to associate with them so far, there will be at Matchless Gifts on Wednesday evening. And they'll be giving some classes tomorrow morning and the day after at Brooklyn Temple. So anyone who would like to follow them like groupies and follow them around to all their gigs, then you're welcome to do that. But we would like to thank you for the time you've given us here at the Bhakti Center. Hare Krishna. Krishna Dev and Partha Prabhu's Ki Jai. And thank you to Jenna for being your great MC. Hare Krishna.